Today we're going to be wrapping up our series on facing your giants. This is episode 7, and throughout these last 7 weeks, we've been taking a deep dive into the life of perhaps the most famous giant killer of all time, a man named David. And we have a unique opportunity that David didn't have, because we get to see David's life from beginning to end. And we see it all, don't we? We see the good, we see the bad, we definitely see the ugly. And when we look at David's life, we get it. We understand the things that he went through because they are the same things that you and I have gone through or are going through. We face those giants the same way that David had. And we get to learn how to do life right from the times that David got it right. But we also get to learn from David's mistakes, from the times that David didn't get it quite right. Because when it comes to your life and to my life, what we need to keep in mind is it's not how you start, it's how you finish. It's not about how your starting goes, but it's how you finish that matters. There's this story that people tell where a man, he dies and he goes to heaven. And when he gets to heaven, St. Peter meets him at the pearly gates. And he looks him over and he says, "So, have you done anything of merit? Have you done anything that you're proud of?" And the man looks at St. Peter and he says, "Well, I can think of one thing." He says, "One time I was driving along, I ran into a gang of bikers. And they were threatening this young lady. So I stopped and I asked them to leave her alone, but they wouldn't. So what I did was I went up to the biggest guy, I smacked him on the head, I kicked his bike over, I grabbed his earring and ripped it right through his earlobe, and I threw it on the ground and I said to him, 'Leave her alone or you're going to have to deal with me.'" Well, St. Peter was impressed, and he looks at the man and he says, "Wow, when did this happen?" And the man said, "Just a few minutes ago. Just a few minutes ago." Right? Now that's an interesting way to finish. Some people might say that's a stupid way to finish, but the point is, at some point in our lives, you and I have to make the decision to face our giants. Because until we do, we're going to keep running from them. And the good news for us is that it's not about how we start, it's about how we finish. And you can decide today, you can decide right now that you are going to finish well. So how do we do it? How do you and I finish life well? Well, the answer to that is really just a review of what we've been talking about over the last 7 weeks. Right? The first thing we want to do is we want to spend our life doing what God created, called, and gifted you to do. God created you, and He called you to do good things in this life. And He gifted you in a particular way so that you can do those good things in a particular way. There is something that you are good at because God created you that way, and He created you to be better at that one thing than most other people are. But you have to develop that gift. You have to turn that gift into its best form. We don't get our gifts in their fully functional form. We have to work at it. We have to practice at it. You know what practice is? Practice is simply putting ourselves in a position where we have to use our gift. And I'm a firm believer in if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And so you have to find and fulfill your potential. One of my favorite books is by a business author who is also a Christian, a man named Malcolm Gladwell. And one of his early books was a book called Outliers, and I highly recommend if you haven't read Outliers. But for you to read it. But in this book, in Outliers, he talks about the Academy of Music. It's a German school of music that is very, very elite. And one of the things that they do with their violinists at the Academy of Music is they separate the violinists into 3 different groups. The first group was the group that had the potential to become world-class violin soloists. These were the stars. These were the guys who just were amazing, right? The second group was the group that was just, good. They were good. And the third group was the students who probably weren't going to be professional musicians. These were the guys who would probably end up teaching music. And all of the violinists, when they come into the school, they're asked the same question. Over the course of your career, ever since you picked up the violin, how many hours have you practiced? Now, here's the interesting result. All of the students started playing at about the same age. They all started playing at about age 5. They all practiced about the same when they started, about 2 to 3 times a week. But things changed when they turned about 8 or 9 years old. The students in group 1 began practicing 6 hours a week at age 9. By the time they hit 12, they were practicing 12 hours a week, or 16 hours a week. By the time they hit age 14, they were practicing more and more and more until they hit about 20 years old when they were practicing about 30 hours a week. Every student in the elite group had practiced more than 10,000 hours. Whereas the students who were in the good group, they practiced about 8,000 hours. And then the students that were in the third group, the students that would probably end up teaching high school band, they practiced about 4,000 hours. See, what it teaches us is that if we want to finish our life well, we're going to have to spend our time doing what God created us to do, what God called us to do, and what God gifted us to do. And it's going to take practice if we're going to develop the potential that God put inside of you and me. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to say to ourselves that we don't give up when life gets hard. Because life is hard. And if you're looking for real hope, don't look out, look up. That's what you have to do. The people that finish well decide not to give up when the going gets tough, when the job gets tough, when life gets tough, when living with your spouse gets tough, when living with your children gets tough, when living with your parents gets tough. The people that finish well don't give up. But the third thing is that we don't give up when life gets hard, but we also don't give up when other people give up on us. Don't give up when others give up on you. Look, sometimes people can be weird, right? One day they're your best friend, and then the next day they're your best enemy. And then the next day, some of them realize that they're just being dumb, and now they want to be your best friend again. And all of us have to figure out how to navigate through all of those different challenges that we have with people in order to get through it. But you have to remember this, that God has a unique calling on your life. And sometimes life is the challenge. But other times people are the challenge. And you have to choose to keep going in God's direction even if no one is with you. We're going to show a little bit of a video clip right here, and it's of a football game between, I believe it's Oregon and Utah, and so we're just going to run the clip right now.
Third down, and he's going to throw it long, and he's got a man there on the run. Kalen Clay.
Did you see what he did? Before he got to the goal, he dropped the ball. He dropped the ball before he got in. And people noticed it, and the other team picked up the ball, went the other direction, and they are the ones that scored. Remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. We don't get any credit for races that we don't finish. There are no points for getting to the 1 yard line. You only get the points, you only score the goal if you make it to the end zone. You have to finish life well. And to do that, you can't give up. You've got to take it all the way. The fourth thing is we have to make our relationship with God the priority. See, we talked about the fact that if we want to finish life well, we have to know what's most important in our lives and let everything else fall into place behind that. And what's most important for you and me should be the one who decided when we would be born, the one who knows when we're going to die, and the one that gives us every breath in between. The one that knitted you together in your mother's womb and that offers you an eternity with Him. God is the most important thing in your life. And you can have lots of important things, but you can only have one priority. And if you want to finish life well, you have to make God your priority, because God made you His priority. The fifth thing we have to do is we have to recover from our mistakes. Don't recount them. Listen, we've all done stupid things. Some of us have done awful, horrible things. No one is exempt from this. In fact, what I want you to do right now is in the comments, just go ahead and type in, if you're watching us online, type in the most horrible, embarrassing thing you've ever done so that we can all see it. Just kidding, don't do that. But you understand my point. We've all made mistakes. Listen, you may have made a mistake, but you are not a mistake. And it's time for us to just get up, shake the dust off, get moving, grow up, and go forward. God isn't looking at you and pouting at you because of what you've done. So it's time for you to stop pouting and to get on with living the life that you were created to live. And then what we've got to do is to remember that your true strength comes from who God is in you and not what you can do. See, essentially, this is all about trust. We have to trust that God's plan for our life is better than our plan. Now, when we don't believe that, we worry. We start to think that the only way for us to have a successful life is for us to do all the work. And it's natural for us to start to freak out. But when we do believe that God's plan for our life is better than we could ever ask, think, or imagine, when we really believe that, when we give God the credit He deserves, and when we do that little by little, what happens is we learn to trust Him more and more in every area of our life. Because it's not about who He is. It's not about what we can do. It's about who God is in you. Not about what you can do. And then finally, to finish life well, we have to prepare the next generation for the future. Listen, it doesn't matter if you're married or not. It doesn't matter if you have kids or not. It doesn't matter if you like kids at all. Every person who is here today with us live, every person who's watching us online, every single one of us has a moral obligation to prepare the next generation for the future. And if you don't help the next generation prepare for what's coming next, then you don't have the right to complain when they get it wrong. See, when we get to the end of David's life, we see that David faced a lot of giants in his life. He beat most of them. Some of them they got to him. But at the end of his life, he had one more giant to face. The giant of his legacy. And David does something really interesting, actually surprising. After being king for 40 years, David steps back from being king and allows his son Solomon to be king even while David is alive. In other words, David gave Solomon the responsibility and the authority of being king, but David was also working side by side with Solomon, showing him how to be king. Essentially, Solomon got to intern as king while still living at home with his dad. Now, isn't this what good parents do? While our kids are still at home, we let them intern being on their own. We teach them how to balance a checkbook or how to write a resume, how to fill out a job application. We teach them how to make the family specialty dish, and then we teach them how to clean the kitchen afterwards. Some of us grew up with that, and when we went out on our own, we were prepared. But some of us didn't. And we quickly realized that when you get out there, there's so much that we didn't know. Like life comes at you fast. David knew that his son had a huge job ahead of him. God had chosen Solomon to be the one to build the first temple. This would be the place where the presence of God would dwell. And so it was a job that had to be done right. Listen to how it's recorded and what David said. David said, "My son Solomon is still young and inexperienced. And since the temple to be built for the Lord must be a magnificent structure, famous and glorious throughout the world, I will begin making preparations for it now." So David collected vast amounts of building materials before his death. And so what we see in that verse is that David did four things to prepare the next generation, four things to prepare his son for what was coming next. The first thing that David did was that David identified the problem and the potential in Solomon. We already know that David had seen Solomon's potential because David chose Solomon to be the next king. David had several sons. Solomon wasn't the oldest son, but he was the chosen son. He chose him to be the next king of Israel. David saw in Solomon what it takes to be a good king, and that's why David chose Solomon. David identified Solomon's potential. But David also saw Solomon's problem. He was young and inexperienced. I mean, if you saw Solomon's resume, it would basically have one qualification: son of king. That's it. That's all he had. He didn't have any past accomplishments or successes that would prepare him for the job of building the new temple. So right up front, David identifies both the potential and the potential problem. But after he does that, then David pointed Solomon towards what was most important: God's presence in his life. See, David knew what were the important things to know when it comes to the king, to being the king. David knew how the economy works. He knew how to lead and how to use the military. He knew how to keep up the morale of the nation. But that's not where David starts with Solomon. David knew that if Solomon kept God as his priority, God would not only take care of Solomon, but he would take care of Solomon's kingdom. So that's why building the temple was most important, because the temple was where God's presence would dwell. David was pointing Solomon towards what was the most important thing: having the presence of God in your life. And then thirdly, David prepared Solomon to succeed. He did this by gathering together all of the craftsmen and the construction workers that Solomon would need to build the temple. In fact, when you go through and read the next few chapters, you see that David even organized all of the priests, and he organized all of the military, getting everybody ready for the construction of the temple. In other words, David took his experience and his expertise, and he put it to work to better prepare his son for the future. See, David knew the job he was leaving to Solomon. He knew how much work it was going to be. That's why he said, "I will begin making preparations for it now." And finally, David sacrificed so that Solomon could win at life. David had already taken the resources and wealth of Israel to prepare all of the building materials for the temple. But David knew that wouldn't be enough. So David sacrificed his own resources to be sure that Solomon would be successful. Listen to what it says. Then David turned to the entire assembly and said, "My son Solomon, whom God has clearly chosen as the next king of Israel, is still young and inexperienced. The work ahead of him is enormous. For the temple he will build is not for mere mortals, it is for the Lord God himself. Using every resource at my command, I have gathered as much as I could for building the temple of my God. Now there is enough gold, silver, bronze, iron, and wood, as well as great quantities of onyx, other precious stones, costly jewels, and all kinds of fine stone and marble. And now, because of my devotion to the temple of God, I am giving all of my own private treasures of gold and silver to help in the construction. This is in addition to the building materials that I have already collected for his holy temple. I am donating 112 tons of gold from Ophir, and 262 tons of refined silver to be used for overlaying the walls of the buildings and for the other gold and silver work to be done by the craftsmen. And then he says, now then, who will follow my example and give offerings to the Lord today? David had already taken the wealth of Israel. He had gotten everything that he could possibly gather together to prepare for the building of the temple. But he knew that that wasn't enough. So not only did he do what he needed to do as an organization, but then David gave everything that he had, all of his personal resources, all of his personal wealth, in order to set Solomon up for the future, to set up the future generations for success. 112 tons of gold and 262 tons of silver. Based on today's spot prices, that's almost $6 billion in gold and $159 million in silver. He gave it all up to give his son the chance to be successful in the future. See, David identified the problem and the potential problem in Solomon. David pointed Solomon towards what was most important, God's presence in his life. David prepared Solomon to succeed, and then David sacrificed so that Solomon could win at life. You see, David's model, David's example of what he did to prepare the next generation is the reason why I announced last week that we were doing a special Christmas offering on December 17th. The Christmas offering is a year-end giving initiative that focuses on expanding our reach to people who are in need and to people who need Jesus. Our plan is to raise $30,000 by Saturday, December 17th, and 100% of that money is going to fund two objectives. First, we are going to resource the Second Harvest Food Bank and the local affiliates, which feed many needy families in our community, and we're going to hire a full-time children's director to better care for our kids. We're going to take some of that money and we're going to make sure that the Second Harvest Food Bank and its local affiliates have what they need to start 2023 right. You see, they run out of food after every Christmas. And people forget that there are just as many hungry people in January as there were in December. In fact, we're also looking at what we can do as a church to become another local affiliate, another distribution point for the Second Harvest Food Bank here in our community. But the majority of that money is going to go to hire a full-time children's director or a children's pastor for Gracepoint. This church needs, and our community needs, one person who is constantly thinking and working on helping children and their families navigate their faith in the 21st century. We need a point person at Gracepoint who can help us prepare the next generation for the future. See, it's not about how we start, but it is about how we finish. And the good news to those of us who didn't get the best start, who had a rocky start at the beginning, the good news for us is it's not about how you start. It's about how you finish. But listen, if you had the chance, wouldn't you want the next generation to get a better start than you and I did? Wouldn't you want to help them identify their potential as well as their potential problems? Wouldn't you want to help point them towards what is most important in life? A relationship with Jesus? Wouldn't you want to prepare them to succeed? So I think we have a moral obligation to do this. And you know what it's going to take? It's going to take our sacrifice. We're going to need to sacrifice our time. We're going to need to sacrifice our resources to make sure that the next generation is prepared for the future. That's why my family is going to sacrifice this December. And we're going to do our part to make sure that we reach our goal and raise that $30,000. So we can make sure that the kids here at Gracepoint and the kids that are in our community get the best care and the best preparation possible. but it's going to take more than us. We have to do this together. And that's why over the next few weeks, you're going to be getting a letter from me in the mail if we have your contact information, with more information about our Christmas offering. And we're going to be talking more about this as the weeks go. We have to finish well, not for our sakes alone, but also for the future. We have to do what it takes to finish well. Because if we're going to face our giants, if we're going to help the next generation face their giants, we're going to have to finish well. We're going to have to leave a legacy. And listen, it's not going to be about convenience. It's not going to be about comfort. It's not going to be about doing the easy thing. It's about leaving a legacy where we do what God has created us to do, what God has called us to do, what God has gifted us to do, and we prepare the next generation to do the same. So what is the legacy we will leave behind? What is the legacy you are leaving behind?
Thank you for joining us for this week's message. Gracepoint Church is located in South San Francisco, California. For additional content or to find out more information about Gracepoint Church, visit us online at wearegracepoint.com.